Azure Active Directory outage on March 15, 2021, a DevOps Postmortem. Imagine it's the evening of March 15, 2021. You're looking at a dashboard that is effectively bleeding red. At exactly 19 times in UTC, the digital gates slammed shut. Suddenly, authentication just stopped. It wasn't a localized glitch or a single server hiccup. It was a massive, systemic failure of Azure Active Directory. Within minutes, the world started to notice. Microsoft 365, Exchange Online, the backbone of modern corporate communication, all went dark simultaneously. From the Azure Admin Portal to third-party apps relying on these identities, everything was locked out. For nearly 14 hours, users across the globe were staring at login screens that refused to recognize them. This wasn't just a down service. It was a total identity blackout affecting millions of users and critical infrastructure. The scale was staggering, and the silence from the systems was deafening. Something deep in the gears had snapped, and nobody knew exactly what it was yet. Imagine you're running a business and suddenly, every door is locked. You can't log into your email, your team can't access their shared files, and your core applications just stop talking to each other. That is the reality of what happened on March 15, 2021, when Azure Active Directory, the massive identity backbone for Microsoft's cloud ecosystem, just flatlined. For a junior engineer, it's important to understand that Azure AD isn't just one app, it's the gatekeeper. It handles authentication for everything from Microsoft 365 and Teams to Xbox Live and third-party apps. When it failed, it didn't just break a single feature. It effectively locked out millions of users worldwide. For about 14 hours, the digital keys were missing or wouldn't turn, creating a massive wall between people and the tools they needed to function. It was a high-stakes failure, because when the identity layer breaks, almost everything else on top of it stops working too. In the world of identity management, consistency is everything. For a massive ecosystem like Microsoft Azure, the infrastructure supporting millions of logins across platforms like Teams, Xbox Live, and Dynamics 365 had to be rock solid. Everything seemed standard until a routine maintenance task, one designed for security hygiene, went sideways. The system was tasked with rotating cryptographic signing keys used by Azure Active Directory to support OpenID and other identity protocols. It was supposed to be a seamless transition, but the automated process failed to recognize a specific key marked to stay put during a complex cross-cloud migration. It didn't just miss a step, it deleted a vital piece of the puzzle. At 19 on UTC on March 15, 2021, that single oversight turned into a ticking time bomb for global authentication. The gears stopped turning, and suddenly, the digital keys to the kingdom wouldn't turn in the locks. It was the afternoon of March 15, 2021, and for a lot of people, the world just stopped. At exactly 1900 UTC, the first wave of authentication errors started hitting. It wasn't just one app, it was a systemic collapse. Suddenly, users couldn't get into Microsoft 365 or Exchange Online. Even the Azure Admin Portal became a ghost town. For anyone running third-party apps relying on Azure AD, the front door was effectively locked. The engineers on the front lines weren't just seeing a few dropped packets. They were looking at a massive authentication failure across nearly every major Microsoft service and even Xbox Live. It was one of those everything is broken moments where you realize the core identity layer, the very foundation of trust for the system, had just vanished into thin air. The scale was immediate, global, and frankly, terrifying to see on the dashboard. It started with a ghost in the machine, an automated security hygiene script that did exactly what it was told, but not what anyone wanted. The system initiated a rotation of cryptographic signing keys for OpenID and other identity protocols, but it mistakenly purged a specific key marked to be retained for a complex cross-cloud migration. By 1900 UTC on March 15, the dominoes began to fall. Because applications could no longer trust tokens signed with that missing key, authentication just evaporated. It wasn't a localized flicker. It was a total blackout across Microsoft 365 Teams, Exchange Online, and even Xbox Live. Third-party apps relying on Azure AD were suddenly locked out of their own data. By the time engineers began rolling back the metadata at 21.5 UTC, they were fighting a secondary war against stubborn caching layers that refused to let go of the old, broken state, delaying full recovery until the next morning. So, what actually broke the gears of the machine? It wasn't a massive traffic spike or a hardware failure. It was a failure in cryptographic hygiene. The root cause was an automated system designed to rotate signing keys for OpenAD and other identity protocols. During a complex cross-cloud migration, this automated process glitched and purged a specific key that had been explicitly marked to retain. Because that key was suddenly gone, applications across the board stopped trusting the tokens being signed by Azure AD. This created a catastrophic domino effect where authentication failed for everything from Microsoft 365 to Xbox Live. By the time engineers realized what happened on March 15, they were fighting a ticking clock against propagation issues and stubborn caching layers that refused to let go of the old, broken metadata. It was a classic case of an automated safety feature becoming a single point of failure for global identity. When a core identity service like Azure Active Directory goes dark, the blast radius isn't just a local hiccup. It's an absolute scorched earth scenario for anyone relying on the Microsoft ecosystem. On March 15, 2021, this wasn't some niche bug affecting a handful of users. It was a massive, worldwide outage that gripped the entire infrastructure for about 14 hours. We aren't just talking about one broken app. We're talking about an authentication wall that slammed down across Microsoft 365 Teams, Exchange Online, and even Xbox Live. Third-party applications tied to Azure AD were effectively locked out of their own users. By the time things began to stabilize around under 9:25 UTC on the 16th, it was clear how deep the rot went. When your primary gatekeeper stops recognizing keys, every door in the kingdom stays locked, and for those 14 hours, the digital world just ground to a halt. When the alarms started screaming at 19 UTC on March 15, it wasn't just a minor glitch. Users were getting slammed with authentication errors across the entire ecosystem. The team had to dig through a massive haystack of failures involving Microsoft 365, Teams, and even Xbox Live. They eventually pinpointed the culprit. An automated security hygiene script had gone rogue, purging a critical cryptographic signing key that was supposed to be retained for a complex cross-cloud migration. It was a classic case of the system did exactly what it was told, but not what we wanted. By 21.5 UTC, they managed to roll back the metadata and begin the grueling process of flushing caches across various servers. It wasn't an instant fix. Because of those stubborn caching mechanisms, the recovery was a slow crawl until most services were finally declared stable at 09:25 UTC the next morning. The fix wasn't a magic wand, but a grueling manual climb back to sanity. To stop the bleeding, engineers had to roll back the cryptographic key metadata to its state before the chaos began. They didn't just flip a switch and walk away. They had to perform targeted restarts of affected services to force through the changes. Because of varying server implementations and stubborn caching mechanisms, it took hours for the old keys to propagate across the globe. We saw a gradual recovery as those caches finally cleared, but the work wasn't done. To keep this nightmare from haunting them again, the The team shifted toward more resilient caching layers and automated rollback capabilities for critical infrastructure. They also tightened monitoring around key signing and rotation processes, ensuring that if a security hygiene script ever trips over its own feet again, the system can catch it before it takes down the entire front door. Look, if there is one thing this mess teaches us, it's that automated doesn't always mean safe. When you're managing a global identity backbone like Azure AD, even a routine task like rotating cryptographic signing keys can become a landmine. The system was designed for security hygiene, but it lacked the nuance to realize that one specific key was pinned for a complex cross-cloud migration. We saw how a single logic error in an automated script could trigger a massive authentication failure across everything from Xbox Live to Exchange Online. To survive this, teams need to build guardrails into their automation, meaning if a change impacts global trust protocols, it shouldn't be allowed to fly without manual oversight or more robust safety checks. We also have to demand better monitoring on caching layers. The fact that it took hours for services to clear old data and realize the key was back shows how dangerous stick caches can be during a crisis. Build for failure, watch your keys, and never let an automated script become a single point of failure for your entire ecosystem. That's how Microsoft Azure turned a very bad day into a lesson. If this saved you an outage, subscribe for the next postmortem.